Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13. And those of you that have been in my class for weeks, we've been going through the parables of the kingdom of heaven. And I think I started the first parable actually in here a few weeks ago when Marshall was out. But I appreciate Clint asking me to come in and teach him in Marshall's place. I try not to take it lightly, so I do appreciate that. But what we'll do this morning is I'm going to review a lot. So for those of you that were already in my class, I apologize. But we will get to the last parable. We will finish it up. So again, those of you that don't know much about the parables of the kingdom of heaven, there's 7 of them. The first 2 parables talk about good and evil. We have the sower in the first part of chapter 13. In verse 3, Jesus is telling these parables to the multitudes at this point, and he says, "Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places, where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. But other fell into good ground, and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. And Jesus says, "Who hath ears, let him hear." And again, Jesus is talking to the multitudes at this point about the parable, but the disciples come to him and ask him, why speak in these parables? And Jesus goes on in verse 11 and says, "Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given." Meaning, he was given the disciples the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. There was deeper meaning behind the parables that Jesus was speaking of. And again, we learned that a parable is a earthly story with a heavenly meaning. There's deeper meanings to this parable. And if you go on down, Jesus does as he always does. He's the great teacher. But he goes on and explains this parable, and I believe it's down in verse 19. And it says, when anyone heareth the word of the kingdom and understandeth it not, then cometh the wicked one and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart. This is which received by the wayside. Again, this is seed that is just thrown out, and the wicked one, the devil, comes and grabs it, and it never really, the seed never has a chance to root, never has a chance to even get started. And it says, verse 20, "But he that received the seed into stony places, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon, which with joy receive it." Verse 21, "Yet hath not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation and persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he is offended." Again, this is the person that receives the word, receives the things of God, and for lack of a better word, kind of gets an emotional experience with that. Kind of lasts for a couple weeks, and then as soon as tribulation or persecution kind of arises, they kind of fall by the wayside, and they kind of get out of church, get out of the things of God. And in verse 22, he goes on and explains, "He also that receives seed among thorns is he that heareth the word, and care of this world and deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and becometh unfruitful." Again, this is the one that received the word but loves the world too much to give up the things that or were needed to follow Jesus. The things of the world, the things of the money, the riches, the fame, all of that takes precedent over this person, and he loves the world more than he loves the things of God. In verse 23, he says, "But he that receiveth seed into good ground is he that heareth the word and understandeth it, which also beareth fruit and bringeth forth some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30." Again, this is the one that heareth the word, does the things of what the word says to do, follows Jesus, and begins to bear fruit, begins to produce, witness, bring other people to Christ. This is the true Christian here in verse 23. But what's interesting to me is when studying all of these parables out, this one in particular, there's 4 examples of 4 ways of how the seed was sowed. 3 out of the 4 resulted in nothing, meaning that Jesus sowed the seed, but people here on earth didn't receive it. Only 1 out of the 4 received it, which is very, very interesting. So that's the parable of the sower. And then the second parable is the parable of the wheat and the tares. We'll kind of go through this as well, just very quickly, kind of just reviewing up until we get to the final one. In verse 24, he says, "Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while he gather up the tares, ye root also the wheat with them. Let both grow until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles, and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." And again, Jesus explains this later on. If I can find it. Let's see. I think it's verse 37. Verse 37, he says, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. Another term for Jesus, Son of Man. So Jesus here is sowing the good seed. In the field, Jesus says the field is the world. So Jesus is sowing seed into the world. And the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. Meaning that there's children of God here on earth, children of the wicked one, of the devil here on earth. Again, that's a personal decision. It's your own decision whether you follow Jesus or follow the devil. But both here on earth live together. And this is what he's saying. In verse 39 it says, The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. Now, remember this. Remember verse 39 for the last parable, because we'll kind of go back to this. But again, Jesus plainly identifies what everything is. The enemy, again, is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. In verse 40, As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. So again, just take note of that for the last one. Verse 41, The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears, let him hear. So again, Jesus does a very good job in explaining these first 2 parables. He goes in depth with each one. He goes from from every kind of little detail there is throughout the parable. He kind of gives us. So again, the parable, the first two parables, the parable of the sower and the parable of the wheat and tares, is parables of talking about good and evil, meaning that while we're here on earth, there will be good, there'll be righteous, there'll be children of God, and alongside of us there'll be evil, there'll be children of the devil. And a lot of people like to compare this to wherever you go in the world, especially in church. Everybody that comes to church is not necessarily saved. So, but it's not our job to save people, to go in and question people's salvation and tell them that they're not saved, or what if they say that they're saved. It's us to believe them for their word. It's up to God to, in the end, to judge and to get the wheat from the tares, if you will. So again, the first two parables of the kingdom of heaven is kind of the nature of the kingdom. Again, the kingdom right here on earth has good and evil in it. We go on to the third and fourth parables, and here Jesus kind of switches gears, I guess, if you will. And these two parables he just gives to the disciples, but he doesn't really explain it in depth like he did the first two. And the third parable starts in verse 31 of Matthew chapter 13. And it says, Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. So again, he's switching gears here. And in verse 33, he tells another parable that's just one verse. He says, Another parable spake he unto them, The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. So these two parables are talking about the power of the kingdom and how the influence of the kingdom has an effect on this earth and all around. And one thing I brought up in our Sunday school class when I was going through this is, think of the disciples at this time when he's teaching this to them. You have the 12 disciples. Eventually they'll go down to 11 once Judas betrays Jesus, and then Paul kind of comes on the scene later on. But you have these 12 disciples that Jesus is saying that this kingdom is going to be powerful, this kingdom is going to be massive, I'm going to rule this kingdom, and everything that goes on around them is completely opposite of what Jesus is saying. Again, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, what we would call today, I guess, Palm Sunday, everything was going. I believe the disciples thought that this was it. Jesus is about to rule and reign. He's about to set up his kingdom. And as that whole week kind of progressed, things got worse and worse and worse. And Jesus, and even in these parables, is talking about a great kingdom. And later on, you'll find that Jesus talks about himself dying, all of this horrible stuff that has to take place. And I truly believe that the disciples at this particular time were very confused, and we look back on it now, we're like, well, everybody just about that we come in contact with knows, either is saved, knows Jesus, or knows of him. You could go to some part in the world and might find a country or an area that doesn't know Jesus or doesn't know the name of Jesus or the influence of Jesus. But for the most part today, around the world with technology and everything like that, the gospel in one way or the other has spread just about the entire globe. And again, at this particular time when Jesus was writing these parables and telling these parables to the disciples, I truly believe that they were somewhat confused because everything around them was falling apart, but Jesus was talking about this great kingdom. And I think that's what he's saying in the parable of the mustard seed. Again, we talked about a mustard seed is the smallest seed among herbs. In that particular time, that was the seed that the disciples would have associated with growing food or whatever. And again, Jesus talks about this mustard seed, this kingdom, if you will start very small but end very, very big. Same thing with the parable of the leaven. Just a little bit of insert of the kingdom into the world can create a big influence. And again, we talked about the leaven has to be inserted into the bread. You can't just leave it on the outside and the bread be good. The leaven has to be inserted in. You have to be in the kingdom to have the influence in the world. So again, verse 31, 32, and 33 are two parables, parable of the mustard seed and parable of the leaven. And they are the parables of the power of the kingdom and how the influence of the kingdom will progress. And even though that we have the first two parables where good and evil kind of reside together, even with the influence of evil in the kingdom will overthrow that and become large in spite of the evil that is there. And then we get to the fifth and sixth parable. So here we have, they kind of skip around here. So it is verse 44 of Matthew chapter 13 starts the fifth parable. And it says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a treasure hid in a field, that which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field." He goes on to tell another parable in verse 45, and it says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man seeking goodly pearls, who when he hath found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it." So again, the kingdom of heaven, this is what I would kind of term the appropriation of the kingdom, the personalization of the kingdom, if you will. And last week in our Sunday school class, we went into kind of great depth of kind of treasure and how people in those days buried things to keep safe. Again, there was no Bank of America or Regions Bank or anything like that where your possessions were guaranteed. So people in those days buried their treasure, buried their valuables. And we taught how this certain man was working in this field. Again, we don't know if he worked for the owner or what, but nonetheless, he was in the field. He comes across some of this treasure that is of great value, that he wants that treasure. And again, in our culture today, if we found something in a field, if we were working and we found something of great value in a field, in our culture today, the noble or the thing the moral thing I guess you would do is you would go tell the owner, "Hey, I found this while digging in your field." And again, this person didn't, but we know that in those times, because of everything that was going on, in doing some research, I found that it was more of, if you came across treasure or something in somebody's field while you were working or digging, it was yours because you found it. So having that mentality, this man could have just taken that treasure and went back home and had his treasure plus this that he found. But he did the noble and the moral thing to do. He buried it, went and sold everything that he had to go buy the entire field to get that treasure. And again, just like in 45 with the parable of the pearls, pearls at that particular time were of great value. It was kind of like diamonds today. Pearls in those days were a sign of wealth, a sign of you're kind of showing off. And again, in Timothy, I think it's 1 Timothy, Paul talks about women wearing pearls to kind of show off their wealth or whatever. And again, pearls were a very risky business to go get. And doing some research, I found that what people would do to get pearls is they would essentially tie themselves to something to go down into the ocean to dig around, and they would risk their lives to get pearls. But again, in this pearl, once this merchant man found what he saw that was a great price, he went and sold everything that he had to go get it. So again, these two parables are the appropriation of the kingdom, the personalization of the kingdom. So we talked about the first two parables talk about good and evil in the kingdom. Then the third and fourth parables talk about the influence of the kingdom and how the kingdom will grow. And then we get to the fifth and sixth parables, and it talks about personalization, talking about how you would need to give up something to get this treasure, to get what was valuable. So this morning I want to go on and talk about the final parable of the kingdom of heaven. And that's the seventh parable. And I'll just say up front, this is very sombering parable. It talks about some very uncomfortable things that will happen. So we'll just get on into it. So verse 47, he says again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angel shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Jesus said unto them, Have ye understood all these things? They say unto him, Yea, Lord. Then said unto them, Therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is a householder, which bringeth forth out his treasure, things new and old. So again, the final parable, what I would call the parable of the net, or something that kind of hit me on the way over here this morning, was this could be the parable of the judgment. We went through the entire, from the beginning of the seed being sowed to the wheat and the tares, till us and being instructed not to weed out the tares, not to grab the tares out, that you might hurt the wheat in the process, and that in those verses that I had mentioned, for y'all to just kind of remember that God will judge at the end of the world, that He will be the one to weed out, to gather the wheat from the tares. So again, it goes all the way through, and then we have those, and then we have the power of the kingdom and how it will grow. Then we have the personalization of the kingdom and how we need to make a personal decision to be a part of that kingdom, how we need to sell, or not monetarily sell, but give up something to get that kingdom. We need to die to ourselves to follow Jesus Christ. All the way up to the last parable, where it's the parable of the judgment, and how he's going to judge these two groups of people. And that if you're not a part of his kingdom, he goes on and clearly states what will happen. But again, we'll just go through this. Verse 47, it says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a net that was cast in the sea and gathered of every kind." So again, Jesus gives a picture of what he's kind of talking about. Something that will kind of relates to the disciples, something that kind of relates to what they would do during that particular period of time. He gives them the picture in verse 44. And that picture is a picture of fishing. What's interesting to me is these principles kind of even go to today. I mean, there's the ways that Jesus talks about different things and ways to fish is kind of from an earthly sense is kind of how we fish today. And we'll kind of go through this. One of the ways is a line and a hook. You just put a hook on the line, put bait on it, throw it in the line, you get one fish. Casting a net. Cast a net, you can get a multiple of fish. And then in this particular case, it's kind of more of like a seine or a troll net that kind of drags the bottom of the ocean. So again, the first one, the line and the hook, Jesus talks about this to Peter in Matthew 17, verse 27. And it says, you don't have to turn there, you can, for your information if you want to. But notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast a hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou open his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money, that take and give unto them for me and to them. So again, this is Jesus talking about fishing with a line and a hook to gather one fish. And in this example, there was a piece of money in that fish to pay the taxes for Jesus and of Peter, I believe. So again, kind of relates to the disciples. In this way of fishing, line and a hook, you catch one fish. The second way is casting a net into the sea. And this is referred to in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, where making fishers of men. Let's see. I think that was it. Yeah. Let's see if I can get there. Verse 4:18. Yeah, it says 17. From that time Jesus began to preach and to say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." And Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. And he said unto them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." So again, that was another way that they would fish, that they would cast a net into the sea. So we have a line and a hook, which is one fish, casting a net into the sea, which was more of kind of related to today, I guess. If you are trolling on the lake and you see a group of fish or whatever, you can kind of, if you're good at it, you can throw and fall on top of them and catch them up and pull them in, and you can get a multitude of fish that way. And again, the third way is a seine or a troll net. And this is what Jesus is talking, this is the net that Jesus is talking about in the kingdom, in the seventh parable. It says, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a net that was cast in the sea and gathered of every kind. If you know anything about a seine net or a troll net, in those days it was probably hooked to a boat or whatever. But just from experience, from my standpoint, when I was younger, we would go to Savannah or whatever, and you would basically just walk out to the sandbar or just past the sandbar, and you would have this long net, and there would be people on each side of it, and you would just drag the bottom and get whatever you got. And again, this is what Jesus is talking about. This net is just going to drag through the entire world, and it's going to grab everything. And then in verse 48 it says, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. Again, this is talking about the second point, the separation process. So there's going to be a separation process, just like you would when you were fishing, and you pull that seine through the bottom of the ocean. You grab all kinds of stuff, good fish, bad fish, stuff that is worthless, and you would only keep the good fish, the prize fish, the stuff that is meaningful to the fishermen. Everything else would be thrown away. And again, this is talking about Jesus is going to have his angels do this process. And it says, verse 49, so shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked among the just. So the angels are going to do this separation process once the end of the world comes, and that's the end. And you have the saved and you have the lost. And it's up to God, and his angels are going to go through and get which is good and basically throw away which is bad. So again, that's the separation process. So we have the picture of the fishing that made it relatable to the disciples, makes it relatable to us. Then we have the separation process and how the angels and how God is going to separate the good and the bad. And then the third thing is the peril. What's going to happen to the bad? What's going to happen to those that are just thrown away? And in verse 50 it says, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So again, Jesus here is talking about and teaching on hell, teaching on how those that are not saved will be cast into, here it says a furnace of fire, or lake of fire, will be cast into eternity, separation from God. And again, this is not the only time that Jesus teaches us about hell. In doing some research, he teaches more on hell than I think he does heaven. We know more about the warning of what we should of a place that we don't want to go. He definitely goes through and he teaches us more on hell than anything else. And in Matthew, I'll just hit one high note, Matthew chapter 5, verse 22. And basically, he's teaching here, and at the end of verse 22 it says, but whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell fire. Again, we don't need to fall into the category of these people. You want to make sure that you're part of the good fish, and the way to become part of the good fish is to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and to follow Him. So, again, what is hell? I think it's important that we kind of touch on this. I mean, this particular parable might not be taught or preached in any church at any point in time, but it's in the Bible, so we have to go through it. We have to understand it. And so in Luke 16, Luke 16, Luke chapter 16, verse 19, we kind of get a glimpse into what kind of hell is kind of like or going to be like. In verse 19 of Luke 16, Jesus here is speaking and says, "There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day." Yeah. "And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom, and cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. So again, hell is a place of torment and misery and complete separation from God. So we've gone through the points. We've gone through, again, the picture of kind of how Jesus kind of lays this out to the disciples, the separation, the peril, what will happen to the wicked. And we get to the fourth point, and the last one is the proclamation. The proclamation of all of these teachings that Jesus has kind of taught throughout these 7 parables. In the proclamation, Jesus, in verse 51, Jesus said unto them, talking to the disciples, have you understood all these things? Meaning, do you understand everything that I've been talking about? Do you understand these mysteries that I've been talking about? They say unto him, Yea, Lord, meaning, yes, we do. And in verse 52, Jesus, I believe, believed, or he knows all things, so he knew that they were understanding everything that he was talking about. Because he goes on in verse 52 and says, Therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which bringeth forth out his treasure things new and old. Again, therefore every scribe, every student, and this would have related to them at that particular time, is like unto a man of a householder. He needs to, Jesus was telling his disciples, you need to go out, you need to warn these people, you need to go spread the gospel, warn them. It says, which bringeth forth out his treasure things new and old. Need to definitely warn those about this separation, about this kingdom. And I'll end on this. Jesus talks about the harvest in Matthew chapter 9, verse 37. It says, starting in verse 37, it says, Then saith he unto his disciples. So again, the disciples have heard all this before about a harvest and what's going to happen. And again, once the harvest happens is the separation. That's the end. That's when you go out and you pick the good from the bad. It says, Then saith unto his disciples, The harvest truly is plenteousness, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that ye will send forth laborers into his harvest. Again, Jesus is talking about the people are out there, the the harvest is there, and it's our job to warn them, to get them to know what's going to happen in the end times. So again, there are 7 parables of the kingdom of heaven. And we'll just go through them real quick one more time. So you have the first 2 parables talk about good and evil. That's the nature of the kingdom, how both will coexist. And then the third and fourth parable is the power of the kingdom, how the kingdom will start small, but with its influence will grow very mighty. 5 and 6, the appropriation of the kingdom, how the kingdom is personal. And then 7, the judgment of the kingdom, how the kingdom will eventually be judged, and that rooting out of the evil will be removed from the kingdom, and only good will exist. So again, that's the 7 parables of the kingdom of heaven that Jesus taught to the disciples in the book of Matthew.